After the crucial Mideast summit in Sharm el-Sheikh, can a peace process be reconstructed with any chance of a successful outcome? My guest is the best-known Palestinian commentator in the world today, a writer and literary critic based in New York, and a man who has won respect, although perhaps at different times, from all sides in the conflict. Has he joined the terminal skeptics, or can he still see a way forward? Idwārd Saʿīd, a very warm welcome to the programme.
Thank you.
Intense international pressure on the Palestinians and the Israelis to reach a settlement. Do you believe they've come up with anything that approaches a lasting settlement?
Not now, I don't think so. I think the best that can be hoped is some sort of disengagement.
So this is a band-aid, what we've seen?
Oh, it's been a band-aid for the last 7 years, I think. In other words, I think the fundamental flaw in what's been happening since 93, since they signed the Oslo Accords on the White House lawn, is basically readjusting the terms of the Israeli occupation. The Israelis have been there all along. They haven't really withdrawn from much. They're still in occupation of about 65% of the West Bank, 40% of Gaza.
And Barak has made more concessions than any other Israeli prime minister.
Well, that is, I know, the line, but I think...
But it's true, though, isn't it? It's not just the line.
Yeah, well, I'm not really sure about that. I mean, settlements have increased during his tenure, more than they did during the first prime minister, Rabin, and certainly more during Peres. He's about
been the
equal
first one
with
to
Netanyahu.
discuss sovereignty in Jerusalem.
Well, discussing is fine.
Sharing it.
Yeah, but it isn't quite the same thing as actually conceding it. And the information I have from what happened in Camp David in July, which, as you know, came to a standstill, or really a stalemate, was that in the end, what they really wanted from Arafat wasn't so much an acceptance of just of the terms of Oslo. They wanted him to sign off on Jerusalem effectively, for most of Jerusalem, and to effectively end the struggle between the Palestinians and the Israelis. In other words, say we have no more...
Well, both sides wanted that, didn't they? I mean, that's what the whole point of the final status negotiation
exactly.
is to end the conflict, isn't it?
Well, it would, if the stated final status negotiations, in other words, what the contents of them, satisfied the core of the conflict, which is the question of the refugees, the question of compensation and or return, and above all, the question of Jerusalem.
Looking at what happened over recent days, though, how far was this orchestrated by Arafat? To a great degree, wasn't it?
I think probably not. I tell you, one thing that I think the press has missed in the West is the large degree to which this insurrection, I think really one has to call it as such, is an insurrection against Oslo, and to a certain degree against the whole administration of the Palestinian side.
But openly incited by Hamas, by Islamic Jihad.
Hamas and Arafat are not on the same side.
No, but then they've had contacts. The Hamas leader, Ismail Abu Shanab, said he'd had a meeting with Arafat, and afterwards he said, we discussed ways of developing this intifada. That's pretty direct.
This is after it started. And people don't always control things that they say they're going to control or try to use. I mean, there was an attempt to sort of lay the whole intifada that began at the end of '87, the Great Intifada, and say this was all done by the PLO. In fact, it wasn't. I think one has to understand that Palestinians are like other people, that they're capable of popular insurrections for reasons that hit very directly at the deep problems of Palestinian life today.
Arafat is said to have come back from Camp David. He sat around in Gaza City. He tried to work out a strategy, and then he said, I want to light a fire and I want it to burn Israel. It was quite clear that this is...
No, I don't agree with that. I think he was cornered. I think he felt... Don't forget, I haven't been in touch with him for several years.
I think he was... terms,
no, we're not on the best terms. Because I disagreed with his policy as a result of Oslo. But I really think he was a cornered figure. I think he felt that he made all kinds of concessions. He played, in my opinion, the American and the Israeli game, taking them at their face value, not realizing, A, that the United States is not an honest broker. Anybody who's lived for 24 hours in the United States will tell you that the number one foreign policy issue in American politics is total support of Israel, regardless of the consequences for the Arabs.
Why would a president then, like President Clinton, invest so much of his prestige and his office in this, if it was going to fail? Obviously, to bring about a solution.
Well, he has a startling incomprehension of the Arab and Islamic world. He has no connection with it, never did, knows nothing about it. He is a born-again Christian. He's a fundamentalist Zionist. And
so you're saying he hasn't come to the table with goodwill at all?
don't think
you're dismissing all those efforts.
I think the notion of goodwill in politics is a rather rare commodity.
We didn't come into this to fail, did he?
Well,
no, I didn't bring him anything.
He came in very successful. He got them to sign. You remember the picture, Clinton holding Rabin and Arafat on either side, bringing them together. I described it at the time like a Roman emperor bringing two vassals together to sign. And that's what he did. Did he bring together the peoples? I don't think so. He certainly didn't bring the Palestinians, many of whom were very skeptical at the time, weren't listened to. I was one of them. Others were hopeful, as Palestinians under siege and under occupation for 33 years.
But the violence now, are you saying that you
this
don't
is the result of the occupation?
You don't think that Arafat incited it?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that gives Arafat powers. I mean,
if you don't mind my
saying so, let me just finish. If you don't mind my saying so, this is to reduce Palestinians to the level of puppets. People, we're talking about sentient human beings who feel hunger, who feel the pangs of unemployment, the inability to move around, watch their land being eaten up on a... Listen, I went...
Sentient human beings who can lynch two Israelis in the middle of a street.
Who have been killed. Look, mob violence is horrible.
No, but
let me finish this, what I was saying. Mob violence is terrible no matter who does it. But 100 Palestinians have been killed, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 Israelis, all of it regrettable, all of it unnecessary in my opinion. All of it horrible. There's no such thing as a nice death, any more than it was nice to watch
a
12-year-old Palestinian kid being shot by Israeli soldiers. 30% of the Palestinians killed are... Listen, if a camera could see them squarely, see the boy and his father squarely within their lenses for the period that it took to kill them, 40 minutes, it must have been intentional. There was nobody around them. There was a wall, and they were killed. They are enemies.
The tearing of two Israeli soldiers, limb from limb on the street.
Well, it's terrible. I don't approve of mob violence, but the context is one of military occupation. Just think what the French did to collaborators. Just think of German pilots who fell during the Battle of Britain here and what happened to them. I mean, this is not a natural situation. It's not as if people going around gratuitously committing violence. There is a military occupation by Israel. There are tanks, there are helicopter gunships, there is hunger, there is confinement, there is above all the dispossession.
And what use then is the violence? What use has it been?
Well, it's hard to tell. A violence isn't always thought out in terms of what it's going to bring, but it demonstrates dissatisfaction. And in this context, I think it demonstrates the unviability of a solution that leaves out the question of justice. This is a people that has been done an injustice since 1948. Our society was destroyed.
I keep coming back to the violence of today. If Arafat is not in control, what's the point of talking to him?
No leader is in control. Who was in control in Serbia? Nobody. There was a general dissatisfaction that removed Milosevic.
It's clear that someone came to the surface.
Somebody came to the surface, and somebody will come to the surface. It was
an election. Leadership. It was an election.
There was an election, but it took
clearly a candidate.
Yes, but he didn't want to leave. So we're talking about a general insurrection.
So what is the point of the Israelis talking to Arafat then, if he's not in control of anybody?
Well, who's in control of the Israelis? It's an Israeli army that is there.
Barak is the elected prime minister.
Yes, but he's there as an occupation force designed to hold on to Israeli annexed territory and to hold on to civilians, to keep down civilians.
But this is a popular insurrection. But he's much more prepared than any other Israeli leader to make concessions.
I'm rather skeptical about that. When it comes down to it, every Israeli leader has said to his people, this is the continuation of our control. We're not good. He still calls them Judea and Samaria. He is trying to hold on to them, repackaged in another form. Israel has no intention of allowing a sovereign, occupation-free Palestinian state. They want to hold on to the settlements, the large settlements. They want to hold on to the access roads, the settlement roads that go across. They want to hold on to all of Jerusalem, which is about 30% of the West Bank.
And what's different? I come back to this question, what difference is the violence going to make? The violence isn't going to help anything. We have 100 people dead from the days of violence.
Yes, more than 100 Palestinians dead, you're right. Who have
benefited from that?
I think we should feel some sense that the present arrangement is not working. There is a popular sense of injustice and oppression felt by every Palestinian, no matter whether that Palestinian is inside the occupied territories or elsewhere. And the general sense of frustration at the American-Israeli control of the situation because of a vast disparity in power. We're talking about the violence of the weak and of the oppressed. We're not talking about the violence of helicopter gunships.
It suits Arafat to paint them that way, doesn't it?
No, it's a fact. It's not.
If you get people out on the streets and they face Israeli tanks,
people have been out in popular insurrections.
They look like losers on the streets.
People have been out in popular insurrections for centuries, and this is one of them.
They've
This is
been
an
called
insurgency.
out as well,
no,
haven't they?
They haven't been.
You
called
know
out.
they've been incited
I know they
out
haven't
onto the streets.
I mean, that's so
you have
irrelevant.
Hamas leaders
People
are
not puppets. Tim, people are not puppets. They don't go out in the streets
they respond
to wreak
to
violence
on, don't they?
No incitement is needed. The occupation is incitement. The control. Listen, I've been there several times.
So what's the point of Arafat signing a truce then? If he can't deliver, you can.
He's going to try.
Get the people out on the streets one day and then pull them off.
Those are questions you should ask Arafat. Don't ask me. I'm not in possession either of a truce mechanism or of the crowd control mechanism that you seem to wish he has. I'm simply telling you that from the very beginning, this peace process was flawed because it refused to address the essential issue, which was the dispossession of a people in 1948 and a continued military occupation since 1967 that has destroyed the Palestinian economy, that has destroyed a whole generation of people, whether through killing or through deportation or through imprisonment. There's still, you talk about releasing prisoners. There are still over 2,000 prisoners in Israeli jails. The Israelis have wreaked violence on the Palestinian economy, on our people, on our institutions. They just blew up Arafat's headquarters the other day with their helicopter gunships.
More violence than Arafat himself wreaked on their own economy?
Much more.
I mean, you yourself have pointed out the corruption that is at the heart of the Palestinian Authority.
By support from the U.S. and Israel. They have supported
the Palestinian leadership.
No, they've co-opted them, let's say. But in the end, they
sold
can't
their people out.
No. I wouldn't say that. I would say that what they've done is they've made an agreement with Israel to continue rule over the Palestinians in the best way they thought possible. I think it wasn't the best way.
And I certainly think they're people of goodwill. You said in 1997 that Arafat has lied to the people, that he is bringing them nearer to self-determination. He's deceiving them into believing that he acts in their name and interest.
Yes, I think at the time that was true. Absolutely.
And now?
Now, I think when he went to Washington in July and he realized what was required of it, he felt, number one, that he had to face his people, his regime, which included the regime of the people. I think at the time that was true. Absolutely.
And now?
Now, I think when he went to Washington in July and he realized what was required of it, he felt, number one, that he had to face his people, his regime, which included the regime of the peace process, has failed to deliver. The standard of living has come down. The GDP has come down. Unemployment has risen. Poverty is to be found everywhere. People are on strike.
Abuse of human rights.
The whole business. Of course, not as much abuse of human rights. Terrible. With the support of the United States, by the way. And as an American Palestinian, I'm deeply ashamed that when Al Gore went to Jericho in 1996, in March of 96, he recommended the state security courts. This is all done at the behest of the Israelis and the Americans who want Arabs put in jail in order to satisfy their security problems. In the meantime, there's 1 million Palestinians inside Israel, citizens of Israel, who are treated as blacks in South Africa were. We have an apartheid regime. This is a religious state that rules people by religion. If you're a Jew, you have privileges. If you're not a Jew, if you're Christian or Muslim and an Arab, you have lesser rights, or you have no rights. So this is an untenable situation.
You see this in far bleaker terms now than you ever have, don't you?
Yes, I'm afraid the situation has gotten now where there is a polarization of opinion on both sides. The Israelis have this, in my opinion, ludicrous idea that they are being victimized. They're one of the most powerful armies in the world. They have 200 nuclear warheads. They have the largest air force in the region, the largest and most powerful army. And
but that's why they say they haven't done 1/1,000,000th of what they could do. So when Arafat says you've declared war on us,
I'm sure
it's not true, is it?
I'm sure we're grateful for that. What they failed to do, which has been the policy from the very beginning, is the hope that in the end the Palestinians would give up and go away. After 50 years of being beaten on the head, Palestinians would say, okay, we'll accept anything. And I think Arafat almost did that in 1993. He realized that the only way he could continue was to try and work with them. And look what it got him. It got him very little. And before his own people, at the end, he had to level with them or show them. And he couldn't. He couldn't sign the final document, which would have literally sold them down the river. And I'm glad his common sense stopped him, because he had to go back and deal with them. And what was required of him was essentially to annul the Palestinian cause and the fact that we've been, without compensation, without restitution, the oldest refugee and largest refugee problem in the world today. Unresolved.
So who is there to speak to?
There's obviously
when Prime Minister Barak talks about a partner for peace, who is there to speak to among the Palestinians?
I think now his man is Arafat. There's no one else. There's a younger generation of Palestinians. I think we need a period of evolution. I think we certainly need a commission of inquiry. We need a force to protect Palestinians who are virtually unarmed compared to the armor and air force of the Israelis. And I think we need an honest broker, which could only, in my opinion, be the UN. I don't think the US can play the role, because in US politics, Israel is a sacred cow. You cannot criticize it. Hillary Clinton's wife, is running for senator in New York. A year ago, before she ran, she said the only solution is a Palestinian state. She's been forced to eat her words on a daily basis. She and her competitor in the Republican Party, who are competing for the Senate seat in New York, are in a daily contest to prove who is more pro-Israel and anti-Arab. It is that simple.
Who can end the violence now? Who can stop,
I think the UN can.
I
think the UN can. An international, as opposed to an American.
What, you're suggesting a peace force?
I think something like that. A peace force, yes.
It's come to that?
I think the Palestinians need protection. Absolutely. The problem is that the last time there was an international peace force run by the United States was in Lebanon in 1982. We had the massacres of Sabra and Shatila. They left too early.
Palestinians don't need protection if they stay in their houses and don't riot on the streets, do they?
Oh, you mean eat grass and
no, I mean don't attack Israeli border positions.
But it's not Israeli border positions. It is Israeli occupation forces who are deep in Palestinian territory. That is.
Well, one was attacked actually as the agreement was being signed in Sharm el-Sheikh.
Good. I think it's important to attack occupation forces. Wouldn't you attack an occupation force in your country? Of course you would.
You've changed.
I haven't changed.
This was
at all.
the man who was preaching reconciliation.
I am
over
still
the years.
preaching reconciliation.
Where's the reconciliation?
You can't have reconciliation.
You're asking people to attack border posts?
I'm asking people to attack occupation forces. Absolutely. I'm not a pacifist, and I deeply believe that occupation, apartheid, has to be resisted. And this is what we've been given from the Israelis. I certainly believe in reconciliation, and I'm trying to think of a way that rises a little bit beyond the...
But you're openly advocating violence.
No, I'm not openly advocating violence. I'm simply saying that it is one's duty as a citizen to resist occupation. It may be non-violent resistance, certainly. I'm for that, if it can be done. I'm for any kind of violence that will resist occupation and apartheid. It was the ANC position.
So the stone throwing is fine. The stone throwing is fine.
I'm not interested in the details of it. I'm not in a position to
attacking holy Jewish sites.
No, I'm against attacking anything. I'm simply saying that occupation and apartheid have to be resisted by whatever means bring about their end. And if...
That's the same thing as legitimizing violence.
It's not legitimizing. It is simply not. It is delegitimizing apartheid. It is delegitimizing occupation. And that's the main political struggle for us. And we haven't done enough.
Why? Because the politics haven't worked?
No. This is part of politics. This is a political campaign that we haven't, and this is where I think Arafat was wrong. I think we have to appeal to the world, and I think certainly the drama of the last 2 weeks has shown that what you are dealing with is not a peace process, but a continuation of the occupation.
Barak was the Prime Minister that the Palestinians wanted.
No, well, what are you telling me? That Palestinians voted for him? I mean, most Palestinians can't vote anywhere because of their condition as refugees.
You certainly didn't want Netanyahu, did you?
Well, I certainly don't want any of them myself. I'm not an Israeli citizen.
But it was the best chance, wasn't it?
Well, history is very dynamic.
He came to power on a mandate to settle, to make a settlement.
Yes, one that suited Israel's interests, which may not necessarily coincide with Palestinian interests. Therefore,
he put his own political position at risk.
Well, he's a poor politician. I mean, he's a man, in my opinion, without sufficient imagination, without the compassion and generosity that is in the end going to be needed. Because what Israel has to do, Tim, is to acknowledge its responsibility for the disaster that we call the Nakba of 1948. No Israeli leader, a few Israeli individuals have, but no Israeli leader has faced up to that past. And you cannot deal with a dispossessed people that is still alive, still there, still watching the ruins of their own history parade before your eyes and say, we have no responsibility.
You keep going back to history.
Yeah, but
what about the present day?
Well,
you said yourself the territories.
The present
there's
day.
There's no exclusive historical claim.
No,
either by Palestinians or Jews.
My solution is to share. My solution is coexistence and sharing. And that's why I say that the Israelis have not acknowledged that part of history which resulted in the destruction of Palestine.
And the offer that was on the table at Camp David, that wasn't an attempt to share?
History is a way of understanding the present. You can't shave it off and say it's not relevant. Of course it's relevant. And of all people, the Jews have the most to say about history because their history has been such a tragic one. And so it's really absolutely symmetrical. If there was some way to bring about some understanding and recognition and acknowledgement by Israeli Jews of the fact that they are living on Arab land, that every Israeli house or Israeli settlement, Moshe Dayan said it openly in 1976, we are perfectly aware, he said, that when we came here, this was an Arab country. Every house we live in was once an Arab house. And therefore, this history, which is buried and invisible, has to be made known. And there has to be some responsibility for it. And that is the way I think there can be reconciliation and understanding. It doesn't mean that the Jews have to leave. It doesn't mean that the Jews are all to be destroyed or moved away. It means that there's a common history of suffering and this self-destruction in this instance.
In July, on the Lebanese border, you were photographed throwing a stone at an Israeli border post. Why?
Because it was a moment of exaltation. First of all, there was nobody there.
You throw stones for exaltation?
Yes, to the end of an Israeli occupation, absolutely. I think it was a common gesture. A lot of people were doing it there, and there was nobody in sight.
Do you regret it?
No, I don't regret it. Not at all.
Regret the controversy? Regret the fact that it's
controversies come and go.
Spoils your reputation in Israel, perhaps?
Perhaps, I don't know. I did a big interview in Israel in August with Haaretz, and I discussed it there. I'm perfectly capable of discussing it.
What signal do you think that sends? I mean, here you are, the best-known Palestinian commentator in the world today, and you're throwing a stone against
I think what signal I'm sending is what
post.
I'm saying, and what I've been saying for 30 years, that there can be no peace or reconciliation between Israelis and Palestinians unless there's an understanding of the other's history. And the party that has suffered the most requires from the person who's caused that suffering, or the party that has caused that suffering, some acknowledgement. The denial will not do.
It requires also the renunciation of violence, finally, by the Palestinians, doesn't it?
I think if you categorize it as violence, you must talk about the greater violence. The greater violence is that of the Israeli army. There's no comparison. Throwing a stone is not the same as having a helicopter gunship fire missiles at civilians from the air. This is the kind of immorality of war that the United States has led the world in, and I'm afraid the Israelis have learned the lesson all too well. Firing tanks at
Israelis claim there
villages.
was a proportionate response, albeit condemned by the Security Council.
Right. Condemned by the Security Council, condemned by the entire world. This is something that cannot be tolerated. Enormously powerful armies
You don't
firing
think the
at civilians.
Palestinians are using these images, that these are the images they want, to put themselves in that position, to show themselves as the losers, to focus world attention on them? You don't
Using
think they're
the
doing
images
that?
how? I'm not quite sure I understand your meaning. You mean they expose themselves to death so they can appear on British television? I think you must take them for more fools than they could ever possibly be. These are people in the line of fire. These are people actually heroically resisting a brutal military occupation, which is without parallel in the late 20th and early 21st century. So I think, instead of admiring their heroism, by saying that they're inciting violence for no purpose whatever except to appear on television, is really a trivialization, a banalization of a truly horrendous situation. I think what one should be led to ask is, why is this happening? Why are people so desperate and so resistant against a regime of such brutality and such a denial of their rights to self-determination as to do this? I think that is the real question.
Idwārd Saʿīd, it's been a pleasure having you on the program. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Thank you.